All right, how's it going, everybody? I'm just going to go through and kind of clarify some of the Module 2 stuff from both my observations from looking at your all's work yesterday, the 8 through 8 assignment, and the exit survey questions. So I think you guys are all doing a super good job. One thing that I would just stress based on everything I've kind of seen is definitely make sure to pay attention. The Module 2 Lightroom demos, those are really important. Now, the ranking, images, using filters, collections, smart collections, those are all important, but not necessarily the stuff that I'm talking about here. The main things that I'm talking about here are what the heck is the histogram, crop, straighten, and edit tone in Lightroom, and the preview before and after, especially the edit the tone. And so I gave a lot of you feedback in your 8 through 8 assignments of like, don't be afraid to push it a little bit further with photo editing. And when I mean that, I mean, really pay attention to things like the white balance. So that's the color temperature, the exposure, the highlights, the shadows, the whites, the blacks. And so if I just click over to my Lightroom catalog here and I pick a picture and go to develop, I'm talking about the temperature slider here. That's color temperature. If I double click, temperature should go back to 0. Exposure. So exposure changes the midtones, kind of everything in the middle of the tonality of the image. And then highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. That's these sliders. Now, the reason this is super important is because, you all have really fancy cameras, and you would think that cameras are designed and built in a way to make the best picture possible. And, by and large, that is kind of true. But really what cameras are all about is collecting data, getting as much data as it can recording as much data as it can. And then we go in and make some edits to it, especially in the tonality, to kind of maximize that information. And so kind of the way to think about it is like, your camera is really just collecting the ingredients. The editing is actually making the meal, right? The grocery shopping is taking the photo. The cooking is the actual editing. Not that you have to go and change your photos huge, right? Like go and make these massive edits to them. But things like tweaking the exposure, the highlights, the shadows, the whites, and the blacks does so much to kind of like balance out the contrast and to start choosing what you want your photographs to look like. So definitely make sure to do that. Every single photograph I have ever edited in my whole entire life as a digital photographer, I have always edited the exposure, the highlights, the shadows, the whites, and the blacks. These are like the fine tune, being able to fine tune the thing, right? So, and, also connected is the color temperature, right? When we have our camera set to auto white balance, it is probably jumping in degrees Kelvin. So that's the degrees in which color temperature is measured. It's probably jumping in increments of like maybe 50 degrees Kelvin, where if I take this color temperature slider, I can go to plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can change it as individual degrees of Kelvin as opposed to jumping in increments of 50. So it's just a way to kind of like fine tune things. So definitely don't skip those. Those are like the most important foundational edits. So once again, that's temperature, exposure, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. Those are always needed on every single photograph. Okay, now let me talk about somebody's question. Somebody had a question about trying to make photographs where you want a shallow depth of field. And you think you have your f-stop correct, but it's just like not creating as much of a shallow depth of field as you would like. So this is where we have kind of the hard realization of photography is expensive. We know that photography is expensive. If you just cruise around on B&H, which is just kind of like a huge retailer of camera equipment, we can kind of, so I'm just looking at Canon lenses here, and I'm going to organize them sort by price, high to low, just to see, right? So the most expensive lens on here is $20,000. It's pretty expensive and pretty limited use lens, right? It's a 1200 millimeter telephoto lens. Even though down here though, right, we have a prime lens. So this is a prime lens at 1200, 800, 600. So none of these are zoom lenses, right? This one starts getting to a zoom lens where it goes from 100 millimeters to 300 millimeters. Most of you are using a zoom lens, probably not a $10,000 zoom lens, but a zoom lens where your lens will go from something like 18 millimeters to 55 millimeters. So you have kind of, you can zoom in and out of the scene. You'll notice that the majority of the most expensive lenses are prime lenses. So those are lenses that only have one focal length. This lens right here, $3,000, it only has 85 millimeters. That's it. The benefit of a prime lens is less elements, which means less pieces of glass inside of the lens. So they tend to be sharper, and they usually have larger apertures. So if I look at this lens that's $3,000, you'll see the aperture range is f1.2 to f16. f1.2 is huge. Where if we start looking at some of the zoom lenses, right, we have a zoom lens right here, f2.8. That's pretty big, but it's not as big as 1.2. 2.8 on this one, f4, right? So this lens right here has an f4 is the largest aperture. Most of y'all's lenses are what are considered kit lenses. So if I just look at, let's see, let's just see, M50, Canon. Let's see if I can bring up a camera here. So here's a Canon EOS R50 camera. It comes with a lens, 18 to 55 millimeter lens on it. That's what's called a kit lens. Most of the kind of consumer, lower level professional cameras are going to come with a lens. And that lens is going to be a zoom lens, 18 to 45. That's pretty typical. I imagine that this lens has maybe I can't see it on here in the settings, but I'd imagine that it has the largest aperture on it. Oh, it actually says right here is f4.5. So kit lenses tend not to have pretty extreme large apertures. And so you're going to be kind of limited on how shallow depth of field you can get with an f4.5 lens. So that's probably your frustration, is you're trying to get really shallow depth of field photos, and your lens, the largest aperture on it is maybe something like f4, f4.5, somewhere in that range, and that's going to be pretty limiting. So my answer to you is buy a $20,000 lens. No, I'm just kidding. There are really good lenses, kind of the lens, when I have intermediate advanced students that are like, what's the thing that I should buy to make my photography a little bit better? I always tell students to get a 50 millimeter prime lens. So let's just look at a Canon 50 millimeter lens. Let's see what we come up with here. So here's one right here, Canon EF 50 millimeter f1.8 lens. That is a really large aperture. Here's one below it, f1.4, 1.8. Now the thing that I want you to pay attention about this is a really large aperture, but also look at the price. This lens is $125. My all-time favorite lenses are kind of that normal focal length lens, something like 50 millimeters on a mirrorless camera or an SLR. And it's kind of cool because those tend to be on the cheaper ends of lenses. Now don't get me wrong, you can get a $1,400 50 millimeter lens. That exists, right? And it's going to have some types of benefits to it, but you would be really surprised how much $125 50 millimeter f1.8 lens will help you in photography, right? You'll be able to get those really shallow depth of field photos with an f1.8 lens. So I always tell my students when they're like, hey, what's the one thing that I could get to make my photography better? Should I get a new camera? Should I get this or this? I always tell them, get a fixed 50 millimeter lens, even if it's the cheapest one for your camera, get it. Because those are really sharp lenses. They don't have many elements in them, not a lot of glass. So that makes a nice sharp image, and it'll have a large depth of field. All right. I hate that sometimes money is the answer. But it is technology, right? So we're studying art and technology always equals big money. So don't worry. You don't need to go out and rush out to get a $2,300 50 millimeter lens. I'm sure there's benefits to it. This $125 one would be super cool too. All right. I hope that helps you. Please let me know if you have any questions. Y'all are doing a really good job.